have no notes and just lists of book titles on my phone, so you know this is going to be interesting. So if things look a little bit different and I look a little bit worse, it's because I'm actually using a camera instead of my cell phone. So when I was in the US, I obviously had to go through my dad's things, and I found this camera that had essentially never been used before, and it turns out it's supposed to be pretty good for making YouTube videos. So trying this out for the first time, it's really odd because I literally can't see myself, where on my phone I could see everything I was doing. So I'm hoping that this will turn out okay. But I also realized that this is a lot higher definition than my phone, so you can see just how bad the bags under my eyes are and how messed up my hair is at the moment, because as you can see, it's a different color. I haven't straightened it because I have naturally curly hair, and I'm kind of trying to go back to that a bit. I'm not doing exactly the curly girl method, but I'm using bits and pieces of it, essentially. Like, I have a new shampoo, conditioner, I have leave-in conditioner, I have curly hair sprays and stuff, and I do still need to get gel, but my hair just kind of looks a mess right now because I'm using some different techniques I've never tried before, and so my hair's just kind of freaking out at the moment. But anyway, that's not why you're here. Instead, I'm going to be talking about basically my favorite books of the year, the worst books of the year, or I guess biggest disappointments I should say, because just because I think they're not that great doesn't mean that other people do, so I should probably word that a bit better. And then lastly, I'll talk about the DNFs I had. I actually had 7 DNFs this year, which is pretty okay. I think it could definitely have been a lot higher, but this has been my first official year of being back into reading. I started back up in December of last year, so it's all kind of come full circle now. And so far, as of filming this, I've read 91 books this year, so that is hugely impressive, especially going from 0. So I'm actually going to talk about the top 5 disappointments of the year, and the reason I did top 5 and not top 10 is I feel like top 10 is kind of excessive, and like, I read 91 books. Like, top 10 is quite a lot of books out of that. So I just went with top 5, make this shorter, especially since, as you can tell, I like to ramble apparently. But coming in at number 5 is We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This came out in 2020 and is one that I've seen hyped up a little bit. If you watch Books and Lala, Kayla really enjoyed this book, which is what put it on my TBR to begin with. And I finally got around to reading it, and unfortunately it just wasn't my thing, which is weird because it's about a field hockey team, I think is what it is. Yeah, so I'm going in with this, like, not rereading any of my reviews, not rereading any of the summaries. I literally just made my list and I'm kind of going with it. So I think it's field hockey, and they essentially use witchcraft that they acquired when they were at summer camp to win their games. So they're on like this huge winning streak, and it follows so many different characters on the team. I couldn't tell you any of their names. I've long since forgotten. And I love witchy books. I love witchcraft, reading stories about it. I just find it all fascinating. But this one just didn't do it for me. I felt like the climax of the story was just kind of meh, and it was definitely one of the more disappointments of the year just because I had such high hopes for it, because Kayla and I tend to share the same taste, but as you'll see in a few books here, it's definitely not always the same. Coming in at number 4 is The Invisible Life of Addie, LaRue, oh my gosh, I almost butchered that title, by V.E. Schwab. This also came out last year and is definitely one of the most hyped books of that year, and it was boring. That's kind of all there is to it, but it's about this woman named Addie LaRue. She is originally from France, I believe, and because who doesn't want to come from France? And she makes a deal with what is essentially the devil to get herself out of a bad situation, and this gives her immortality, eternal life, but at the cost of everyone she meets just like instantly forgets about her the second they're not interacting with her anymore. And what kind of makes the plot go along in this book is she finally meets someone who does remember her, and it kind of goes from there. But I found the pacing of this to be very slow, and honestly I found the chapters that were about her previous life and about like her immortality and going through the past a lot more interesting than the modern day chapters, as it does flip-flop between time periods. And I just wanted to know more about this devil character. I'd rather read a book about him than Addie LaRue, essentially, but yeah, this one just wasn't for me either. I just found it way too slow, nothing was happening, and it just ended up being very boring for me in the end. Third is a book that I had very high hopes for. It is a new release, and that is The Project by Courtney Summers. I have previously read Sadie, which I did enjoy quite a lot from her, so that's kind of where my high hopes came from. Also, The Project has to do with a cult, which I also find cults fascinating and how people can be sucked into them. So that's another reason why this was a hyped book for me. But essentially, this is about a woman whose sister got sucked into this cult and has kind of like just disappeared off the face of the earth. And so the other sister's been researching this cult, trying to get a hold of her sister, trying to find out what happened to her. And the story basically starts with her interacting with the cult and going through everything that happens from there. But this sister makes some really weird decisions and kind of goes against her entire character. And also, as with Sadie, the climax happens off screen and then just kind of ends. So it just feels like you don't get that payoff you wanted. But unfortunately, this was another book where for me, it was just dull. It wasn't near as interesting as I had been hoping. The cults, it really just talks about like 2 or 3 people in the cult instead of like the whole cult itself. And so it's just didn't live up to my expectations at all. Coming in second place of the top 5 most disappointing books of the year for me is a book that I read for the Literally Dead book club, which is run by Books and Lala. Once again, she loved this book. I do not. It is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I actually own this one, but I will be getting rid of it as soon as I can. As you can see, this is a bit of a longer story, and the premise is extremely interesting, but the way the author pulled it off and the payoff in general just isn't it for me. So this is about a 17-year-old, I think she is, 17 bordering an 18-year-old named Jade, and yeah, she's obsessed with slasher movies, which I love horror movies, just not the slasher genre. So I mean, I get it, but she just is so obsessed with them that she like wants a slasher movie to happen in her real life. She wants to be a part of a real life slasher movie. And so some of the decisions she makes in this book are to kind of push that narrative and push this slasher fantasy she has into happening. And I absolutely hated that. That was like just a huge no from me. I hated some of the decisions she made based on that, and it just like was not realistic. Like, she just came off as being completely mental. And the way this book is told is we're pretty much like in her mind. We're hearing what she's, well, we're reading what she's thinking in every moment, and that also makes the pacing of this book be kind of slow because you're kind of just going moment by moment with her. But if you know nothing about slasher movies, you'll be very frustrated with this book, as I knew almost all of the references just from knowing the horror genre and enjoying the horror genre, even though that's not exactly my thing, my favorite subgenre. So it was okay for me, the references were okay for me, but if that's not your thing, you're going to be so confused, you're not going to understand what's going on, it's just going to be too much. And unfortunately, this book went in the direction I didn't want it to go in, and I don't know, I didn't like the climax. There were some parts that I did enjoy, but there's some very, very unanswered questions, and the questions are huge and are ones that take up like a majority of this book. So it's like, how can you just not answer that at the end? So once again, not my thing. But what I find also interesting is Stephen Graham Jones. I'm currently listening to the audiobook of The Only Good Indians, and I have like 2 or 3 hours left of the audiobook, and I'm really enjoying that so far. So that one's probably going to get a much higher rating than this. And at the top of this list is Horseplay by Judy Renee Singer. This is from 2004, so a bit of an older book, and it's one of those that I had gotten from probably a thrift store or something. I used to ride horses when I was a teenager. I still love horses and wish I could ride, but that's a story for a different time. And so I went through a phase where I was just like collecting all of the horse books. Anything that had to do with horses, I wanted it. And so this was one of those. And unfortunately, I think it's like one of like 2 books that I gave 1 star this year because it was just trash. Like, that book literally deserves to be burned in a trash can kind of thing. Like, it's just, oh my gosh, I don't even know. It's just one of those books where all of the dialogue, all of the decisions, all of the characters are just so cringe, you just can't believe it's happening. But from what I can remember of the plot, it's about this woman who's, I think in like her 30s or something like that. Like, she's a little bit older than the general protagonist when it comes to these kind of books. And she ends up working on this famous German lady's horse farm. I think she's supposed to be like a famous dressage rider, this German lady. And so she like lives on the farm, works on the farm, rides on the farm, takes lessons on the farm, does everything on this farm. And there ends up being like some weird cult stuff happening. I literally just remembered that. It's just like, oh, yeah. But it's one of those things where it comes out of nowhere, makes no sense, and it's just kind of like, what? It's kind of like a play on like the rich and famous are like all in a cult and do weird rituals and stuff like that. But yeah, there's also a scene in this book that is definitely not consensual and is just very sexually assaulty, and I just don't read this book. I think it's literally in a bag in my closet waiting to be like thrown away or given away or something. So yeah, 0 out of 10, don't recommend. On a more positive note, we have my top 5 books of the year, and this list was a lot harder to narrow down. Like, the top 2 or 3 were really easy, but then the last 2, it's like, oh my god, what should I put in here? So these could literally be interchanged with anything else that I have on my favorites that I read this year on my Goodreads, as they're just all really good. So coming in at number 5, we have Revenge 11 Dark Tales by Yoko Ogawa. This, like, as you could tell from the title, is, and then I lost the word of what it's called, anthology? Yes, there we go. It's an anthology of 11 stories, and they're all interconnected with each other, which I have discovered this year is something that I really love. Oh my gosh, I just want to read all the stories that are like that. And they all vary in like content and subject and everything, but I was just so blown away at how well done the interconnectivity was and just the stories in general that it instantly became one of my favorites. It's one I definitely want to reread, maybe next year or the year after, because I could definitely tell that, like, after I read it, I knew if I reread it, I would see more things that connect. So it's definitely something that I really enjoy in this genre. Next is a book that was also a pick for the Literally Dead book club, but this was also one of my, like, most hyped books of the year, I guess, or like most wanted new release, since I had previously read Bunny, and that is All's Well by Mona Awad. So this book follows a woman who has chronic pain, essentially fibromyalgia, which is what I have, so I instantly felt a connection with this main character, and it goes through how her pain kind of affects her life. She is a theater teacher, and she's trying to get the kids to put on the play All's Well by William Shakespeare, even though they want to put on like some other play. I don't even remember what it was. But she meets these people, these men, who kind of give her the power to transfer her pain to other people. And so she starts to flourish while the people around her start to wither, kind of thing. And she's pretty much just enjoying her life, kind of looking down on people and how they had treated her previously. And it gets dark, it gets crazy, it turns into a fever dream, and I absolutely love it. I could just relate to the main character so hard, and I think if you haven't dealt with the pain that the main character has, it's going to be a bit hard for you to, I guess, empathize with her and kind of understand her motivations in this book. But if you're like me and you definitely understand it, then this is almost like a sweet revenge kind of book. But yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I highly recommend it to anyone that suffers from chronic pain and just kind of wishes that you could live a normal life. So, yet again, even though this is not my phone, it cut off mid-recording, and since there was no indication it had stopped recording, I didn't know until over a minute after it had stopped, and so it cut like an entirety of a book that I had already talked about. And all I know is it cut in the middle of me talking about All's Well. So I don't know, I can't hear the sound or anything. So I don't know where it cut me off, but All's Well. Good book to read if you suffer from chronic pain. Go read it. Mona Wad, must-read author. Just gonna summarize that because I don't know. But yeah, the frame is different. I have no idea why I stopped recording. Like, the card is not full or anything, but I'm just gonna keep going, and I'm a little frustrated. But that was the fourth book. Okay, I had been telling you about the second book, but now I've just completely cut out the third book. So anyway, the third book is All the Young Men by Ruth Cocker Burks. This is a nonfiction, which is unusual for me to read, but I picked it up because the subject matter is really important, and it's essentially about the author in the 80s in the South helping out those that have AIDS or HIV positive or are just gay, as their families and pretty much everyone in the world was rejecting them during this time. The 80s was when there was the huge AIDS panic and everyone was freaking out about it, and they were acting like you could get it just from being in the same room as someone with it, and hospitals would quarantine their patients, and you would literally have to wear a hazmat suit to see them in the hospital. Like, it's very sad, very dark stuff, and this woman just gave her life, her resources, her time, everything into helping these people, and really formed some amazing friendships and connections, and just the work she did and does is just so amazing. And it's obviously heartbreaking to read about how the world treated these people. Like, it just blows my mind that people can be like that. But I think this is a must read. Like, everyone just go pick up this book now, put it on your TBR. It is one of the best nonfiction in my opinion, but I don't read much nonfiction, so I don't know how much value that actually has from me saying it, but fantastic book. And then, where I had originally thought I was cut off, we have one of the most hyped books of like the decade, and it's actually from 2011, so like it makes no sense, but that is The Son of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So everyone who's watching this has probably heard of this book, and look at this version of it. Isn't it like so gorgeous and amazing? I had actually gotten it from the library to read, but I loved it so much I knew I wanted to own it. And I think this is like the new Waterstones edition from like the UK, but I got this on Book Depository, so there's that. But this is the retelling of the story of Achilles and Patroclus, who end up in a relationship together even though there's a war going on, and it's a beautiful retelling of their story. I cried, I was surprised at some of the character growth that happened. Like, this was just such a good story. I know some people don't like it, or some people think Circe is better, but I've actually also read Circe, and I actually didn't like that one very much. But this one, oh man, I'm probably going to reread it at some point. and it's gorgeous. It is just, oh, such a good story. But it follows them, well, it follows Patroclus to start. It's told from his point of view, and it starts when he is a child and he ends up exiled, where he is basically sent to Achilles' kingdom, and they form this bond, this friendship that turns into a relationship, and it goes through them growing up, them preparing for this upcoming war, because everyone knows Achilles is going to be like this amazing warrior, and so everyone is scrambling to get him like on their side kind of thing. And yeah, it's a lot, and it is so sad but also so beautiful, and I really enjoy Madeline Miller's writing as well. And just the last few pages of this book, like, it will wreck your soul. And finally, if the camera hasn't stopped recording, because I can't tell either way, we have the book at the top of this list. It was written all the way back in 2000, and that is Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves. So, this is a big boy. It is a lot. It took me a week to read, which I know some people it takes like a month, but like, look at some of these pages, like, yeah. So, yeah, one word on the pages. So, I mean, it's not as bad as it looks, because the back is also an appendix, so it's not this huge, quite as huge of a monstrosity as it seems. But this is a book that I've known about for over a decade. I was close to someone that read it, and that's how I originally found out about it. But it's always kind of been on my radar, but I never thought it would be something that I really wanted to read. But then once again, it was one of the picks for the Literally Dead book club from Books and Lala, and this ended up being one of her favorite reads of the year, and it is my top read of the year. 100%. This book is just an experience to read. It's probably the best reading experience I've ever had. And like, my feelings just got so caught up in this book. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. But there is more than one story happening in this at a time. It's like 2 or 3 stories kind of being told at once. There's the main story, which is the Navidson record, I believe it's called, which is by far my favorite part of the book. Like, if you just read that in this book, I would be fine with that, because that is the good part. That's the meat of this. That is what makes this amazing. And then there's all these footnotes that kind of tell the other story of this guy named Johnny, I think. But I hate Johnny, so I don't really care, so I'm not going to talk about him much. And the main story is basically about this family where the house is bigger on the inside than the outside, and all the craziness that comes along with that. But just the formatting of this book, really adds to the experience. Like, it's not, like, even though it seems really freaking random, it really isn't. To me, it added to the tension and the anxiety of the story so much that it's key to read it in this format. Like, don't read the audiobook. The audiobook, I think, would make no sense. It would make no sense. I would be so confused. No audiobook. I don't even know if that exists for this. It should not if it does. But I would say, like, this version with the color and everything is definitely the one to go with, as the word, like, house in this, I think, is, like, blue every time it's mentioned. And so, yeah. And there's some things like this where there's other added color and stuff, so I really think this is the way to go. But gosh, like, I really wish I could wipe my memory and read this again, just because it is so good. Alright, lastly, I'm just gonna list these DNFs because there's no way I'm gonna talk about all of them. I already know this video is probably way too long, I've been talking way too much, and this frustration with this camera so far, not liking. So, I'm just gonna quickly go through the DNFs I had. So, oh yeah, these aren't listed in any particular order, by the way. So we have Cthulhu's Reign, which was an anthology from various authors based on the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft. I read the first story, put it down. Too much tentacly, non-consensual stuff happening for me, so DNF that. The Magicians by Lev Grossman. I tried to buddy read this with a friend, and oh my God, the misogyny and just like how the main character views women and stuff in those first several chapters, like I just couldn't. It was too much for me. I did not like it. Next is a book that is really disappointing that I DNF'd this, but it's Before Trans, 3 Gender Stories from 19th Century France by Rachel Mesh. This book, oh man, I basically just researched the people after I DNF'd this because I just wanted to know their stories, but instead it was kind of like there's an introduction and everything by the author beforehand, and unfortunately she just kind of kept rehashing that in the stories about the people. Well, I was like, I want to know about this person and like what they did and everything, and instead she just kind of kept saying the same thing over and over, and I was like, what? Like, come on, I want to know about the people. So that's why I DNF'd that. Next is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I know a lot of people like this, but I read the first few stories and I was like, this is just too nonsensical. It made no sense to me, was not for me. The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is one where I might get for my library again at some point and finish it, but essentially I read like a quarter of it, was bored with it, had other stuff I wanted to read, so I just returned it at the library. How to Pronounce Knife by, I apologize in advance for the pronunciation, Suvankum Thamavongsa. I'm very sorry about that. This is another one that's an anthology, but it's all by the same author. I just wasn't into it. It's another one where I wasn't going to force myself to read it, so I just returned it to the library. And finally, we have Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, which just came out this year. And I read this for my local, well, I read about half of it for my local book club, and I hated how repetitive it was. I hated all the characters. There was just no redeeming quality about what I had read, and so about halfway through I was just like, nah, I'm done. I'm not gonna force myself to read this. Don't care enough to finish it, and that was that. Alright, this video is probably a bit chaotic, and I don't even know if this camera is recording. I'm gonna have to figure out why it even stopped. I don't understand what's happening, but thank you for getting to the end if you made it. This is my first video back. I don't know how to feel about it, but I wanted to try and get something out before the end of the year, especially since like this is my first full year of my new reading journey, and so that part does feel really good. But thank you for hanging out with me and testing out this new camera with me with all its flaws apparently. And until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.